Hi, everybody. This has been a busy time. I wanted to get a program out Friday, but a number of things came up and prevented me from doing that. So here we are. Sometime back, it was in October, I believe, I advised you that there were a number of organization efforts meant to subvert Vatican II, discredit Vatican II, and discredit America and the American order. At the time, I told you, certainly the neo-trads or the traditional Latin Mass Catholics are definitely one such group. Opus Dei is one. Tradition, Family, and Property, or TFP, is another. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a deeper dive into TFP, Tradition, Family, and Property. What we're going to see are tactics and goals that are evident in their activities and that are also practiced or held or repeated by numerous other groups that are attacking Vatican II and the American order. These groups are all intent on bringing tyranny, and so they have to. They're a fifth column within the church, within societies. They have to destroy the American order, and essential to doing that is they have to destroy the importance of a person and the idea of the primacy of the person when it comes to all social conventions, all social order. And so by doing that, what they do is they eliminate a big check on the power of tyrants. In other words, when you have systems that recognize the importance and the value of the person, then the power of tyrants is weakened because these people then can assert their rights, and the people can assert their rights in accordance with the system is very fair and just. And the system then has got to serve people. Everything has to serve people, serve the person. The family, ethnicity, economics, all of that. The political system, and I've talked about this before, has to serve the person. The person does not serve the ethnic group, does not serve the religion. The person is the object of benefit of all of these different systems. And when you eliminate that idea and you make the person just simply an individual or a cog in a vast machinery, then the power of the tyrants is increased. And what happens is their power is concentrated. The thing with democracies, and to an extent with republics, is you actually have power more diffuse in society, and that's very important. And coupled with the fact that you recognize certain bills of rights or declarations of human rights, this gives an incredibly powerful counterweight to power which would destroy people, cause wars, create poverty, and do a lot of other bad things. So, since Pope Leo XIII's, 14th rather, encyclical Magnifica Humanitas was promulgated, the fifth column in the church and in society has attacked it and has attacked him. And I've observed this for the last several weeks. The general line of attack is to say that the encyclical and the Pope are modernist humanists, secular humanists, heretical. There's some other choice names. Such criticisms are made out of ignorance or made out of malice. I think for the most part they're made out of malice. They come, from what I can tell, largely from wealthy and powerful MAGA Catholics, as well as from the chattering Catholics who claim to be traditional. And these complaints have highlighted to me, once again, the existence of a MAGA Catholic ecosystem of doom and destruction, of dissent, suspicion. And in this ecosystem, you have, the people with their fake magisteriums, their own magisteriums, to support ideologically and doctrinally what the fifth column is doing. And one of these is Anthony Stein. EWTN has its talking heads that come on regularly and provide the psyops, provide the messaging that is used to attack Vatican II, used to attack the Pope, used to attack civil society, the American order. And then you got researchers, guys like Michael Hitchborn with Lepanto Institute, who once told me that, what he does is he researches and he gets paid to research. Yeah, I'd like to know who pays you, Michael, because all of his pieces are hit pieces, and they're all taking a certain point of view, and you can see it just by simply looking at their site. So one individual who platformed an attack piece, which he claimed falsely was a balanced approach, and he castigated me for saying it was for saying it was an attack piece, because it was an attack piece, was someone by the name of C. Preston Noel III. Well, right away you got a problem with the name, right? Anybody who puts a three after their name is a wannabe aristocrat, or maybe they are an aristocrat in their own mind. But anytime you put a three after your name, you're a wannabe aristocrat, like Thurston Howell III on Gilligan's Island. Okay, so we got C. Preston Noel III. He's an aristocrat, or so he thinks. And then C. When you abbreviate, the old saying goes, when you abbreviate your first name down to one initial. Okay, like C, and the C stands for Charles, apparently. When you abbreviate down to one initial, you can't trust that person. Like J. Edgar Hoover, E. Michael Jones. You can't trust these people, okay? Noel is a uh, I guess I could call him in short C3. So I'll just say C3. So C3 is a leader of tradition, family, and property in the USA, or what is sometimes called informally the American TFP. More formally, it's known as the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. Gee, that sounds powerful. It sounds Catholic, doesn't it? It is described on its own website as, quote, an organization of lay Catholic Americans concerned about the moral crisis shaking the remnants of Christian civilization. End of quote. Uh, I'll go into that later. Okay, according to their website, his job is public liaison. The American TFP is behind the America Needs Fatima campaign, which is, as I think back, 25 years, how I first heard of these guys. America Needs Fatima. Fatima's got this mystical draw to many people. It's prophecy, and mysticism and prophecy are an important part of this fifth column in the church. Why? Because this fifth column is against reason. And mysticism and prophecy feed into this denial, this rejection of reason. And the American order is reason. So this fifth column, this insurgency that C3 is part of and other MAGA Catholics are part of, feeds on things like mysticism, mystery, prophecy, fear, anger. It all goes together. And it takes rationality out of the picture. And indeed, I mean, TFP is against reason. It is against the Enlightenment. It doesn't want that in human affairs, as I'll go through further. Okay, so according to Legistorm, under Preston Noel III, C stands for Charles. He's 71. He's registered to conduct lobbying and foreign representation by the Foundation for a Christian Civilization, Inc., and he's also listed as a public relations director of that organization. So he's registered to conduct lobbying and foreign representation. So I think you can call him a foreign agent. I think that's a fair statement. According to its website, American TFP, and TFP is an international organization. I'll get into that. According to its website, the American TFP is one of many autonomous, quote, one of many autonomous TFPs that now exist around the world dedicated to the same ideals and the same service of Christian civilization, end of quote. Anytime they say Christian civilization, be careful. They're coming for you. They're coming for all of us. Okay, so TFP was founded in Brazil in 1960 by Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira. He lived from 1908 to 1995. Um, Very traditionalist, you want to call it, very backwards looking individual. Some call him a fascist. I think the whole movement is fascist. The TFP is usually involved in culture wars matters, and on the American TFP webpage, it states that they are opposed to the following. Now, this is very interesting, and I'm going to talk about some of these at greater length. Right away, what you see is they're opposed to the culture war issues because that gets the most clicks and eyeballs and support. Okay, so they're opposed to quote contraception, abortion, euthanasia, human cloning, social acceptance of homosexual practice, anti-discrimination laws that give homosexuals a privileged status, the lifting of don't ask, don't tell in our military, homosexual adoption, domestic partnerships, civil unions, same-sex marriage, transgenderism, homosexual films, theater plays, events, and pro-homosexual clubs on Catholic college campuses, um, public blasphemy, nudism. Okay, so right away you see these social issues, this focus on sexual matters, right away, and right away that should be a warning, because when they attack these things, they're trying to get people fired up. They're trying to get people scared. They're trying to get people to join their cause. Okay, and this hides their deeper agenda, which is to take away people's rights eventually, and to concentrate power in the hands of a few. This is how they get into power. This is how the Nazis got into power. They emphasized these things, okay, and they scared people. And we're seeing it here with TFP. Um, Okay, they're against nudism, socialist childcare, socialist healthcare, socialist allocation of federal waters, death taxes. They're against death taxes. They're against self-managing socialism. They're against socialism. Okay, they're against international communism. Oh boy, this is a big one. International communism. They're against President Carter's human rights policy, the policy of détente with communist regimes pursued by American and Western governments. They're against President Carter's human rights policy. Okay, this is very important because in 1977, President Carter established human rights as a pillar of American foreign policy. He wanted to make sure countries we were dealing with were promoting and advancing human rights because that helps the person. This is something the church agrees with. It always has. And so they are against human rights. TFP is against human rights. TFP is against what the church is for and what America stands for. And earlier this year, I guess it was last year, the Secretary of State, Rubio, and Trump did away with that whole pillar approach in dealing with foreign countries. And you can see that in the way Trump has dealt with Venezuela, the way he's dealt with Iran, and he's dealt with other countries. They don't care about human rights anymore. Well, this was an important objective of TFP. This is an important objective of tyrants, of people, of the aristocrats who want to do away with the power going in the little man, who want the person to be destroyed. And they want individuals that they can use for their pleasure and for their profit. That is why President Carter's human rights policy is on this. I mean, it's a stunning admission by TFP because they're basically saying they're against the person. And yet this is a focus of Magnifica Humanitas and also the Catholic Church for a very long time. I think about 2,000 years. Okay, so they don't want human rights, and I'm going to explain why that's so as we get into it. Okay, they're against, they taunt with communist regimes. They hate communism. They almost give it this mythical quality that it's always out there. It's under every rock. It's lurking everywhere. When that really is not the case. Communism is a tool that the Russians use and others use. I mean, the Chinese use it, but it's very much of a nationalist regime and nationalist country. Okay, so then they're against liberation theology, progressivism, the Vatican's policy of Ostpolitik with communist governments. Everybody's a communist. The retroactive lifting of statute of limitations for civil cases involving sexual abuse. Isn't that an interesting one? In other words, they are against lifting statutes of limitations for civil cases involving sexual abuse. That's very interesting, isn't it? The enactment, I mean, it indicates a lot of bad things. Okay, the enactment of state laws forcing clergy to violate the seal of confession in cases of child abuse, the removal of beauty from democratization of the Catholic Church, frenetic intemperance in the economy, whatever that means, the ecological movement, pacifism, imprudent nuclear disarmament, and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Okay, the one thing they don't talk about as being opposed to is fascism. And they also don't say they're opposed to tyranny. That's because they're for these things. Okay, so again, I talked about the repudiation of human rights. President Carter's human rights policy began in 1977 to make the defense and the advancement of human rights necessary for the person, which is an important concern of U.S. foreign policy. And so they attack Magnifica Humanitas because human rights is an essential part of that encyclical, an essential part of protecting the person from AI, an essential part right ordering societies. So the attack piece I mentioned earlier was by a guy called Luis Sergio Solomeo. He's written articles for TFP for about 25 years, as far as I can tell. The TFP student action says he's a Catholic scholar, quote, Catholic scholar who has authored many books, essays, and articles, end of quote, and, quote, currently teaches philosophy and history at the American TFP's Sede Sapientiae Institute, end of quote. I looked around, I didn't see many books. There was one about Islam, something about socialism, of course, the evils of Islam, against Islam. A couple on Fatima, again, you know, this mysticism theme that runs all throughout these insurgents, all throughout these really these fascist, tyrannical movements on the right. And talks about the errors of Russia. I don't know what that book's about. It probably does not include the use of nationalist operations in the West to advance Russian geopolitical goals and to advance tyranny. Probably doesn't include that. That book about it, the errors of Russia, that this guy Solomeo supposedly wrote. Um, Other than that, you look at his articles, and they're just a continuous attack on the last few years, on Francis, on synodality, on Leo. This is the theme that the insurgents in the church keep coming back to undermine Vatican II, to undermine the American order. They're using it to leapfrog into other things, and it's really a front for greater changes in society that will do away with a lot of freedoms, that will do away with democracy, essentially, and give power to just a few. Okay, so TFP's Catholicity, for lack of a better term, it's unique, but it's increasingly common with those on the right. It's emblematic of, in many ways, opposed liberalism. Religion is used to destroy, to erase the person, justify control by a few. It's a revolt against reason and good government. Um, and however, TFP is a transnational operation, as I mentioned before, from Brazilian activists and the American New Right, as reported by Margaret Power in Transnational Conservative Catholic and Anti-Communist Tradition, Family and Property, and New Perspectives on the Transnational Right. This is in a book called New Perspectives on the Transnational Right. Once again, their goal is to bring about tyranny. Okay, that's what they're doing, and it's controlled by a few, and they're working with tyrants work with certain state actors. Some of those state actors, include Russia. So what's very interesting, and I think this is the most important part here of my talk today, is a book that was written by Penny Lernoux, came out about 45 years ago, 1980. Um, and the book sets up how TFP operates and how a lot of these Catholic secretive pro-tyranny, pro-fascist operations operate, and how we're seeing the MAGA Catholics operate in this country. So Peggy Lernoux wrote this book called Cry of the People. She exposed TFP's nature and its tactics in destabilizing countries and advancing tyranny in the form of fascism. And it's around page 293 to about page 304. She gives some specific examples in there. I'm not going to go into the specific examples because they're time and place unique. I just want to get into the principles here. So she goes on to write, she says TFP is akin to fascism, but it is, quote, a throwback to 18th century Europe, as yet untouched by the French Revolution. This is really primitive devolutionary stuff, folks. This is really bad stuff. Okay, when the Catholic Church defended aristocratic privileges as a divine right. I mean, imagine being born to a society where you can't say things because you're not in the right bloodline. That's the height of irrationality. That flies in the face of reason, of right order. Um, so the Catholic Church, when at a time when Catholic Church defended aristocratic privilege is divine right. TFP's insignia is a medieval lion. Most of its members are from the wealthy property classes and yearn for an earlier time when the Latin American Church upheld the right of a few patrones to rule a mass of peons, end of quote. Now remember, TFP came from Brazil, but it's spread throughout Latin America, so she's making this reference in terms of the TFP that's spread throughout Latin America. Let's continue on with Penny Lernoux' book from 1980, Cry of the People. Quote, TFP's first commandment is the utter sanctity of private property. Utter sanctity, okay? And in countries with progressive bishops such as Chile and Brazil, this has forced it, that is TFP, into repeated clashes with the hierarchy on the issue of agrarian reform. They don't want people having wealth or money. And what our founders understood, and what Thomas Paine understood, was that by defending and acknowledging the civil rights and the natural law rights of people, you not only help those people, you helped economies, and you diffused power throughout society, because people were able to own property and to earn from it and to make money from it and to be creative and help everybody in society. Abraham Lincoln knew that. Everybody's known that all throughout our history. Okay, but TFP wants to do away with that. Okay, so TFP's first commandment is utter sanctity of private property. And in countries with progressive bishops, such as Chile and Brazil, this has forced it into repeated clashes with the hierarchy on the issue of agrarian reform. The movement's members tend to be narrow-minded nationalists. Okay, nationalism goes with tyranny, goes with aristocracy. Nationalists with a xenophobic reaction. Xenophobic. This is traditional Catholics, neo-trads. They're xenophobes. They're racists. To any suggestion by foreigners that there might be something wrong with their country, particularly if the government is running the country for the benefit of the wealthy. So, in other words, if anybody says there's something wrong with the country, with the government that runs it for the benefit of the wealthy, there's something wrong with them. They're probably communists. In addition, she goes on to say, third point, blindly anti-communist, seeing subversion in anything remotely resembling reform. Now, this is where it gets interesting. And I see this online. I see these guys, these TFP people running around with fake names, saying, oh, that's communist, that's communist. And they've created, as a diversion here, as a digression rather, they've created this world, this worldview where everything is about communism, and unfortunately, what they've done is they have actually discredited many credible sources that people would not look into because these nut jobs are talking about them continuing this communist aggression, after perestroika. Well, that has turned a lot of people off. The reality is that Russia is now a very nationalist state. It uses communism like everything else, but it's not a communist state. It's more of a criminal enterprise. Okay, but this group of people who I think are with TFP and other neo-trads, talk about this continuing communist operation. And so it draws people off, and they use a lot of Russian names. Unfortunately, they use Anatoly Golitsyn, who brought up some very good things. But there are other people who brought up good things, and so unfortunately, this is a misdirection that a lot of these accounts are doing. They're pulling you away from the real issues, getting you to focus on something that only exists in their mind and to draw people off of, which is this international communist conspiracy, which doesn't exist. Okay, so then she goes on to say, quote, while the organization exists primarily to maintain the privileges of the rich, that goal has been disguised by jargon about degenerate political systems, which TFP claims have caused the Western countries to succumb to Marxist penetration. Degenerate political system. Well, that's the same thing the Nazis said, right? Society is to be purified along the lines of Mussolini's corporate state to produce a society in which everyone knows his place and is happy to keep it. Know your place. Shut up, peon. Know your place. Now give us your money. But hey, you got your Latin Mass? Yeah. And you can say you're Polish or English or whatever. Yeah, that's it. That's all you need. Now go fight our wars and give us more money. That's what it's about. Okay, its members, TFP's members, were the intellectual and financial backers of military coups supported by the CIA. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. After the military took over, TFP members and fellow travelers were active in these regimes' persecution of the Catholic Church. See, TFP worked with the CIA to overturn communist organizations and communist governments. And communism is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It is a bad thing. And America fought it because communism destroyed the person. Jacques Maritain explained this. Communism makes the person a cog in a vast machine. America says the person's important. We're going to protect the person, just like the church says the person's important. And so America fought these communist regimes. And if you go back to John Epstein, I've talked to you about him, his book about Code of International Ethics from 1953, the Catholic intellectuals, the natural law intellectuals said, communism is a bad thing. It's penetrating societies. It needs to be fought. The world needs to get together, get inside societies that have been penetrated by the communists and fight it. Okay, and that's what America did. But what the TFP did is like a virus. It kind of jumped on, the CIA attack cell, and, it kind of rode into battle and used this opportunity Yeah, help get rid of communists, but also put in strongmen, military men in power who then would suppress parts of the church they didn't like. So the TFP would use the American order to attack elements of the American order down the road. See what they did? So its members were the intellectual and financial backers of military coups supported by the CIA after military took over. TFP members and fellow travelers were active in regime's persecution of the Catholic Church. I'm going to get into this. When it supported right-wing Catholic groups, the CIA had principally in mind the political objective of removing left-wing governments by military intervention, which was a good reason. It was a solid purpose. And it was just, it was proper, it was right. But one result of the collaboration was to strengthen such organizations as TFP, which emerged as religious vigilante squads for the military regimes. Thus, the CIA could be accused, and was accused by a number of prominent Catholic leaders, including Brazil's Archbishop Helder Camaro, of inciting one sector of church to attack another. So the TFP helped the CIA overthrow communists. And then the TFP used the government, which was militaristic, to go after its enemies, who were considered liberal, and basically were pro-person, and they used the military to go after their enemies in the Catholic Church, to purify the Catholic Church, which is what we're seeing today with TFP, right? They're attacking their enemies in the Catholic Church, the liberals, they call them in the Catholic Church. She then goes on to discuss the nature of these attacks. And by the way, and then they blame the CIA, right? And the TFP just kind of walks away. They go into the shadows, like the Russians, They just disappear. It's really a nefarious group. I mean, this is really, really evil stuff. But that's what they did. They used the CIA to do their dirty work, and then they blamed the CIA if things go bad. And they don't take any blame. TFP doesn't take any blame. But they helped put in was it Pinochet in Chile? TFP helped put in Pinochet. He removed Allende, right? Okay, so then Peggy Lemo goes on to talk about the nature of those attacks. In one situation, the TFP was unable to split the hierarchy. It continued to put out scurrilous propaganda aimed at driving a wedge between the laity and the clergy. And she mentions a couple of books. One was Fire, the Chilean Kerensky, or Frey, the Chilean Kerensky, and the other one was The Church of Silence, in which the TFP called on the Chilean laity to show their love for the church by refusing obedience to their pastors. Well, guess what's going on in America now? And guess what's going on elsewhere in the church now? Refuse obedience to your pastors, coming from certain prelates, certain priests in the Catholic Church. They're using the same tactic that the TFP definitely used, if didn't pioneer, in Latin America. Okay, in the late 1900s. We're seeing the same thing repeated here because they want a church that supports tyranny. They want a church that does not recognize the importance of the person. The same strategy being used now in this MAGA ecosystem that I've been talking to you about. It's the same tactic over and over again. You see it in all these Catholic influencers. Over and over again. Same tactic. What I just told you. Drive a wedge between the laity and the clergy. Show their love for the church by refusing obedience to their pastors. Because the pastors are too liberal or whatever. Okay. Both Leo and Francis advanced the dignity of the person that cuts against hierarchical, tyrannical societies, and TFP doesn't like that. Okay, so I did some more digging on C3, our friend C3, aka Charles Preston Noel III, and he's involved, or he is involved in the Council for National Policy. The Southern Poverty Law Center did a report in May of 2016. Called the Council for National Policy Behind the Curtain. And it's really an excellent report. I'll try to put it in the comments here. and it says, quote, the Council for National Policy is a highly secretive group, a key venue where mainstream conservatives and extremists mix. For 35 years, a shadowy and intensely secretive group has operated behind the scenes, providing a venue 3 times a year for powerful American politicians and others on the right to meet privately to build the conservative movement. The CNP is, in the words of New York Times, a little-known club of a few hundred, and most of the New York Times, it is known as, quote, little known club of a few hundred of the most powerful conservatives in the country. Trump and 5 other GOP candidates addressed the group. Trump was the favorite in 2016. CNP has 413 members. Who are some of these members? Well, let's take a look at that. Frank Gaffney promoted bogus stats to Trump about Muslim violence. Steve Bannon! Oh, good, yeah. And then Charles Russell Noel III is also a member, and he's a member of the governing board. Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council, Tim LaHaye. Quote, there are business titans, Christian college presidents, owners and editors of right-wing media outlets, GOP mega donors, government staffers, and leading members of conservative think tanks, the NRA, Federalist Society, politicians, political appointees, anti-abortion activists, also some of who are less known publicly as conservatives. There's Linda L. Bean, Michael Peroutka. He's on the board of governors. Jerome Corsi, who attacked John Kerry. Joseph Farah, who runs the conspiracist online news outlet WorldNet Daily and employs Corsi. Matt Starver, leader of Liberty Council. Alan Sears, founder of Alliance Defending Freedom. T. Cullen Davis, a multimillionaire, who was acquitted in 2 separate murder trials. William Sees, who is a wealthy John Bircher. Paul Weyrich, who founded Heritage Foundation, and he was intimately connected to the Russians. He helped them to take on the traditional values idea. And you have to read Catherine Stewart's book, Money, Lies, and God, which just came out, and I'm reading it right now. She mentions Paul. And then there's Stuart W. Epperson, co-founder of Salem Media Group, Nelson Bunker Hunt, Richard DeVos, Foster Friess, Edward Meese, Pat Robertson, who pushed a world Jewish conspiracy, and Austin Ruse. You see these names over again. Oh, Leonard Leo's in there. I forgot to say that. Tim Wildman of the American Family Association. Let's see. Howard Phillips, U.S. Taxpayers Party. Phyllis Schlafly, Gary Bauer, Steve Forbes, Larry Arnn of Hillsdale, Wayne LaPierre of the NRA, and of course Leonard Leo. The goal is a united conservative movement to assure by 2020 policy, leadership, and governance that restores religious and economic freedom, strong national defense, and Judeo-Christian values under the Constitution, and to quote, in other words, tyranny. Okay, so they're all working together to advance this agenda. I'm really running out of time. I try not to go this long, but I wanted to make a point that this idea of sexual perversion has been hyped and used since the time of the Nazis, and it's used for them to get into power. I mentioned that before, a couple of articles here, but I'm not going to go into them. Okay, so to recap, the TFP is fascist, it's nationalist. It's there to benefit the elites, to create a closest society. It wants to do away with the American order, it rejects the American order. It does not want the person, other than as an individual to be used for pleasure and profit. It'll give you religion, and it will give you ethnicity, dances and songs and certain food. But in return, you're going to lose your freedom, you're going to lose your wealth, you're going to lose your mobility. It hides itself. And then uses the tactics that we've seen before. It blames the CIA for all the problems. When you blame the CIA, then you say, well, see, America's elites are bad. The liberal elites are bad. The American order is bad. See what they do? They see the TFP and the nationalists and the tyrants use the CIA ostensibly to attack communism. And then when that happens, they say, oh, see how bad the American order is. See how bad the Americans are. See how bad the elites are. The liberals are. The liberal order is. It goes in and topples countries. Well, we got to do away with that. We got to bring in our version of tyranny. You see the game the TFP is playing, folks? Do you see how we've been played for years by these people who claim they're Christian, they're Catholic? Hides itself, it blames the Americans, it attacks the church, it attacks right order, it attacks God and man. The TFP. See Preston Noel the third. Okay, well, I think that's about all I got for today. Thank you.